welcome back. My name is Lexi Jong, and here I like to talk about luxury makeup and luxury makeup brushes. Now, today we are doing our third episode of A Bunch of Brushes, which is a brush series that I started on my channel every 2 weeks. And if you're interested in seeing more of these, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you know when the next one will be up. Now, today I'll be focusing more on natural hair Fude brushes, but this video really applies to any makeup brush. All makeup brushes have the same general anatomy. So you're looking at a handle, a ferrule, and the bristles. The ferrule is going to be the metal part that is basically where all of your bristles are held together. And there is an adhesive inside here that helps keep your bristles in place. Some ferrules are pinched, like this one is here. You can see how it's kind of dented in, it's pressed in, and that helps give the brush a different shape and a different amount of flex or give. You can also have something with a round ferrule. You can see that this one is not pinched, and this will give us a different shape on the brush. So whether it's pinched or round doesn't make a difference with cleaning or storage. However, with any type, we want to make sure that we are not getting any water inside the ferrule because you could disturb the adhesive and create more shedding from your brushes. Now, a very common question is when people buy a new brush, do you need to wash it? And the answer is yes, you most definitely need to wash new brushes before use. One of the major reasons is, and this isn't always the case, but a lot of brushes, when they are prepared for transport or for packaging, they are coated with a liquid. And oftentimes with Fude brushes, it will be a liquid made out of seaweed or nori. And in that case, it's just like a thin liquid, but it's there to help protect the bristles and kind of keep them in shape so they're not splaying out during transport and so forth. And it's just there for protection, but you do want to wash that off. In addition, with any makeup brush, there are sometimes chemicals used during the process of making the brush as well, and some of that might still be on the brush hairs. So you do want to clean those off before you use them. Another common question that people have is when you first use your brushes or you're first washing them, is it normal to see shedding? And it actually is normal to see shedding from the brushes. Now, specifically when you're looking at a Fude brush, what happens is they are taking all of these natural hair bristles, and if you look at a natural hair, it has like a natural taper at the tip of it. So they're gathering those bristles by hand and they're placing them exactly where they need to be in the brush to get the exact curvature. They are not going to place the bristles and then cut it to that shape. They are actually hand placed to get the shape in that brush. And that's one of the reasons that Japanese makeup brushes are more expensive than, for example, an IT Cosmetic synthetic brush, where they can basically just cut those fibers to the shape that is desired. Now, because of this hand gathering process, or actually any type of bristle gathering process, what happens is when you are gathering all of those bristles, you're then putting them in. And keep in mind the actual bristle length of hair is going to be going down to about here or here. So you're looking at a hair that's actually about this long, but it is encapsulated in the ferrule here. So when you see hairs that are kind of falling out, unless they are going to be like twice the length of what you're seeing in your bristles, it's not actually falling out from the brush. Oftentimes there are going to be loose, smaller hairs that kind of get trapped, just kind of like bunched together in there, but they're not actually enclosed in the ferrule. So they're not technically part of the brush. They're a loose hair. And it's kind of like the same thing that happens when sewing. You know how sometimes you buy some clothes and you see like some of those loose threads? A lot of times they're just loose threads that were not picked off. They're not actually part of the garment. They were just kind of stuck there, but it's not necessarily indicating that it's falling apart. And the same thing is true when you see loose brush hairs from your brush. And it's very common to see a little bit of hair fall out, the first few times. And when I say a little bit, I'm talking like 4 to 5, maybe even 10 the first, time or two that you wash it. If you're seeing tons of hair, that's definitely another story. Or if you're seeing the longer hairs come out, then that's indicating that the adhesive is not really holding your bristles in place and there is an issue with your brush. So just beware that you may see a little bit of shedding from your brush. And one of the things that is recommended before you use brushes in general is to kind of tap them off just to make sure any loose hairs kind of dislodge. Another common question that comes up when people are washing their brushes for the first few times is the dye. Sometimes it appears that the dye is coming off of your brushes, and you can notice that by washing them and then wiping them on a cloth. And if you see any like pigment coming off, or if the water in your bowl is turning colors, then that can indicate that your dye is running. It is actually normal to lose a little bit of dye the first few times that you wash them. If, however, you are losing dye past that time period, or it's an older brush and now all of a sudden you are losing dye, that indicates that you are using too harsh of a cleanser. And in that case, you're stripping the dye from the brush, which is a bad thing. Change your soap and you shouldn't have a problem with that. But it is normal to lose a little bit of dye the first few times that you use that. And personally for me, with the Fude brushes that I have that are dyed, I have not noticed any dye leaving from those, but I have purchased some dyed synthetic hair brushes in the past, and I have noticed more dye loss with those. So it's just something to note, but it is normal to see it the first few times. Now, before we get into the cleaning, I want to talk about storing of brushes. And there are a couple of different ways to store your brushes. First of all, anytime you have a nice Fude brush, you really should use it. So I know sometimes you get this like super nice, super soft brush, super expensive, and you don't want to use it too often. That's okay. You don't need to use it all the time, but you should really use your brushes at least once a month. And that's because prolonged storage of the brush can promote shedding. And essentially, if you're not using that brush, the oils and so forth that are naturally present in that hair, everything's starting to dry up a little bit and it can become a little bit more brittle, and you can promote shedding of the bristles by not using it. When you are using a brush, it's coming in contact with your skin. It's getting some of those oils replenished on those bristles. And then even with washing and so forth, you are removing those oils, but it's another reason you just want to keep using your brushes so that you are keeping them in good shape. Now, brushes that you are using every day, you should keep in some sort of container. This is actually just part of a refer box. This is a cardboard box, and these are my synthetic Linda Hallberg brushes, and you just want to keep them with the handle down, bristles up. And that is the way to store your everyday brushes. Now, I have a few other containers that I use too. So the ones that I use every day that I am not washing on a daily basis, I keep in this mug, or I also have this brush bar, and this is the brand brush bar, but they have different versions on like AliExpress and Amazon that are less expensive as well. But you just have this synthetic coating here, and you can see that it does come off. So if you need to clean it for any reason, but you see this flower petal design, it's made to fit your brush handles, and it stretches so that you can fit any size handle. The ones I had in the mug, however, look at the size of this handle. I'd really be deforming this. So that's why I have the mug for my thicker handle ones. And then any brushes that I'm using but I'm not ready to wash yet, they go in here for the week. My brushes that are clean that I have not used yet, all go in these containers. So I have two of these, and I have mine organized kind of by shape. So these are my short handled ones in these first two containers here. And then I have my eye brushes here, and I try to keep my larger ones separated from my smaller ones. And then I have another one of these containers with face brushes, fan brushes, cheek brushes, and foundation brushes as well. So I try to keep things in the categories in which I'm going to use them. Now, those containers I picked up on Amazon, and honestly, I picked them up because I wanted something that wasn't plastic and they looked pretty. They have a mirror bottom. Now, if you follow Sonia G, or Sweet Makeup Temptations, she has a blog, and one of the things she recommends about these types of storage containers is fitting a piece of felt or silicone on the bottom or the base of those, So when your handles are going in there, they're not clunking on something hard. They have something a little bit softer to hit. And that I think is a great recommendation. I haven't done it, but it is a good idea to do so. Then of course I have some smaller brushes that I don't put in those containers because they don't fit well. Before I was doing YouTube, I actually had drawers in my bathroom vanity that I had bought these nice little containers, bamboo, storage containers essentially. And I had those in my drawers and I separate my brushes there and I lay them all down in there that way. And that was great for these types of brushes as well as these other ones. But now that I have moved up here and I'm actually sitting at a desk, I like to keep everything in those containers. So those are a couple different options. I think I got off track, but what I was saying was I just leave this sitting next to my container on the desk. So I don't actually have it sitting up at all, but I use my foundation brushes so regularly that I'll use it and then I put it aside. And I keep a little plate with brushes that I have used over on the other side of my desk. So anything that's dirty, I'm kind of gathering together. And I do try to wash brushes every day or 2 days, 3 days, but I don't like to have them pile up in huge amounts. So anything that's dirty that I will not be using again goes over here. And if I use a cream product, I do try to wash it that day so the cream product does not dry on the bristles. When you have a cream product, it's important to wash your brushes more frequently because as those cream products dry on here and then you go to wash that off, it becomes a little bit more brittle and you run the risk of breaking off the brush hair when you are trying to remove the actual dried up cream product. So I do try to keep those separated. Now, if you have brushes that you do not use on a regular basis, then what you really want to do for storage for them is you want to either have them in some sort of closed container, like a box, specifically a felt line box would be great, or you want to put them back in their original packaging. So for example, if you have Surratt brushes that you don't use too much, they come in those little boxes. You can put it directly back in those boxes. They also sell brush cases that you can use to store brushes that you are not using on a regular basis. Some of those are kind of like a fold over bag. I've seen them in leather and nylon and different materials. There are also some like cloth ones as well. So it's really more about just keeping the dust off of those brushes and making sure that whatever packaging you put them in, you're not deforming the shape of them. So you're not squishing everything together. Everything kind of has its own space. That's one of the good things about the brush cases is they usually have a separate place for each brush. A while ago, I have also seen another thing that you can use to store your brushes, and I haven't seen it in a while, but essentially it was a piece, can't remember, I want to say it was wooden or bamboo or something, but it was like a slightly elevated or slanted board. So it was raised at the top and it just had some elasticized sections to put your brushes in. So you can kind of keep them separated and you're keeping it slightly elevated. And this was designed specifically to fit inside drawers, so you could store your brushes nicely without them clanging together inside a drawer. And that is another option. Again, I saw that years ago and I don't know where you would purchase that now, but if you find that, that could be a good option as well. Now, the next question is always, how often should I wash my brushes? And honestly, there are so many different schools of thought on that. And I honestly don't think that there is a wrong answer because it really depends what you want to emphasize more. Especially in this time now with the pandemic going on and everybody being a little bit more cautious about germs and so forth, a lot of people are being more cautious about washing their makeup brushes if you are going out and you run the risk of contamination. Now, in my opinion, I like to use my Fude brushes only on myself, so I don't have to worry about sanitizing those bristles. If I'm using a makeup brush on another person, I use synthetic because alcohol can really dry out the brush hairs. So it can be done. You want to spray them with alcohol for sanitizing the brushes. And I have no problem doing that with my synthetic brushes, but doing that on my nicer, more expensive brushes, I don't want to add alcohol. It can dry them out and it can disturb any dye or anything that's on those brushes as well. So it's something that if you have to do it, but it's not advised. So Now, in general, the recommendation for washing brushes is if you have used a cream product, you want to wash that brush the same day that you used it, pretty much right after you use it. You don't want to let that product accumulate and dry down on the bristles. So anytime you use a cream product, you should wash it right away. And again, for a cream product, you want to use undyed goat hair or synthetic bristles. Other hairs like squirrel and fox are more delicate. However, there are some sources that say fox hair is okay to use with cream products. So it's up to you whether you want to risk that or not. They feel so soft and delicate to me that I personally avoid it. I have done it a few times and I've just made sure to wash them right away. I haven't had any issues whatsoever. So it's really just, if you're willing to make sure that you don't let that product dry on it, it's probably not an issue, but I personally am not going to run that risk. Now for eyeshadow brushes, there are two schools of thought. Many sources recommend washing your brushes every single day. And that is because it's so important to keep your eyes safe and free from bacteria. And reusing a brush just kind of increases the likelihood of possible contamination of your eye. And you can end up with some sort of eye infection like pink eye, but you can also end up with much more serious conditions. And anytime your eyes are at risk, it's not worth risking. So many sources recommend washing your eye brushes on a daily basis. However, there's another school of thought that say, well, you really don't want to wash those brushes too often. So if you are just cleaning them with a microfiber cloth or a tissue and wiping off any residue, you're good to go. Or you can use one of those brush sprays. I personally don't use any of the brush sprays. I don't like how, I feel like there's like a residue left on there and I just don't like that. So I don't use any of the brush sprays because I always feel like I'd rather just have a clean rinse with water afterwards. And that's just my personal feeling there. But if you use one of the brush spray cleaners, you can actually spray your brush, kind of wipe or, go like this with your bristles against the cloth and get off any residue or pigment. And that should help with, cleaning there until you want to do a deep clean. So again, I think that's really more of a personal preference. Either way, you still want to wipe your brush off in some way before you use it again. Now for powder brushes, anything used for finishing powder, setting powder, blush, bronzer, anything that is a powder product, those brushes you don't have to wash every day. And I usually only wash mine once a week. And again, there are different schools of thought on this. For example, if you look at the Surratt website, they will recommend washing those brushes weekly, even though they are using squirrel hair, which is very, very soft and delicate hair. Now, if you look at some other sites, for example, Fude Beauty or Hakuhodo, they recommend, specifically squirrel hair as well, washing those brushes for squirrel hair 3 to 4 times a year. So they recommend actually just taking a microfiber cloth. This one here is dirty, but this is one of the cloths I use. I keep this on my lap when I do makeup so I can easily wipe my brushes as I am working. And you really want to use something with a higher nap. This one, I consider this more of a medium nap, but a high nap just means that your fibers are elevated. So it's kind of like the difference between a shag carpet and a flat carpet. So if you're looking at something like Berber style or just a shorter pile in general, you don't have as much surface area of that carpet as you do with a shag rug. And the same thing goes with microfiber cloths or clean cloths in general. The higher the nap, the more surface area you have that is hitting the bristle fibers and allowing it to remove pigment. So a higher nap cloth is going to help clean your bristles more effectively and more gently than something with a shorter nap. The same thing is true when you are cleansing your face with makeup, and that's why I like the halo and makeup eraser and so forth. Things like that are so effective. It's because they are a higher nap product and they have more surface area to come in contact with your makeup and face. So they're able to pull that more effectively. Now, as I was saying, squirrel hair brushes are often recommended for cleaning only 3 to 4 times a year. And what they recommend doing in between each use, you should wipe it off on a tissue or something like a microfiber cloth to get rid of any of the pigment. And when you're doing that, so here's my cloth, here's my brush, you're just gonna run the bristles back and forth like this. You can, if you have, you can also go like this, but you wanna be pretty gentle. If you have something that requires more vigorous scrubbing, in my opinion, I would go ahead and do a wash. But you don't want to be super rough with any of your brushes. So you want to go like this to kind of release any pigment, and then you just kind of want to run it back and forth to kind of pick up anything. And again, that's one of the reasons the high nap is important, because as you're doing this, you're able to get more in between here. Now, goat hair and synthetic hair brushes are a little bit more robust. You don't have to be quite as gentle. You can clean those 1 to 2 times a month, which is recommended by Fude Beauty and Hakuhodo. But again, as I mentioned, if you look at some other sources, you can see that it's recommended once a week or even daily, depending on your use with those. So again, I think the amount of time that you wash them it's going to vary, and you really want to weigh whether or not you are worried more about keeping your brushes super clean and hygienic versus the actual taking care of the actual bristles on the hair. Now, for me personally, what I like to do is, as I mentioned, I have this little plate here, and I put any of my used eye brushes on that plate. I also put any brushes that, for example, maybe I used a super pigmented color and I don't really want to try to rub it too much with a microfiber cloth, but I want to remove the color. So I'll put that there. And then anything that I used a cream or liquid product with also goes there. And that's my pile for cleaning. And then after I'm done with my makeup, I go and I wash it that day. Now today I have some brushes piled up because I saved them to do a cleaning demo with you. Any brushes that I have used a powder product with that I'm comfortable using, again, I put in my brush bar or my little mug, and those will sit there until the end of the week. And then on the weekend, I go ahead and I clean any of those. If I come across one that I ended up setting aside to use again, but I didn't really use it again, I'll leave it. So I'll use it maybe 4 or 5 times before washing it. But if it's something that I did use all week, every day, then I pick that up, I wash it. Now, before we get into the cleaning demo, one last thing. The lifespan of a brush is, in general, 3 to 5 years. But if you're taking really good care of it, these brushes can last you many, many years, like over a decade. And a lot of that is going to be how well you take care of your brushes. And one of the things you want to make sure is not to be too harsh with your cleaning, but again, you still want to keep them clean and hygienic and use them on a regular basis. 2 more things I'd like to mention is that some sources recommend using a comb, a Fude comb, to kind of comb out your bristles. So if you look at the Hakuhodo website, they actually recommend that you wash your brush, and then before you set it aside for drying, you actually take this comb and you comb through your bristles. I personally do not have a comb, and I have no intention of purchasing a comb because I just feel like it's extra tugging on the bristles. That's not necessary. My bristles are not getting tangled or anything like my hair would, so I don't really feel like a comb is necessary. I may be completely off on that. I am no expert on these. This is just my personal opinion. So if you use a comb and you love it, great. But I personally would be nervous about using it on a regular basis because I feel like, especially when the brush is wet, even though you're making an attempt not to get water in the ferrule, you never know, like you have extra moisture there, you have extra humidity, and pulling on it with a comb, I feel like even if it's going through smoothly, it's not necessarily and could result in, loosening of the adhesive. And that's just my personal opinion. I have not tried it. Now, before we get into the demo, let's talk about the different soaps that you can use. And there are a few different things that are recommended. So you can buy one of the many brush cleaners. Different brands have their own brush cleaners. You've got the Beauty Blender cleaner, and I actually prefer to use two different things. So I do keep this on my bathroom sink. This is the Beauty Blender, the Blender Cleanser Solid Pro. And this is the black one. And as far as I know, this one only comes in one size. I have been using this for a year and a half for this particular one. And it comes with a little silicone brush cleaner. I don't use this one. I have one that I prefer better. So I keep this on the bottom of my container and I put my soap in here. I just leave this on here and I will put my brush directly on here. Now, using a solid soap gets your brushes very clean. However, that extra drag of dragging a brush around a solid soap can be a little bit harsh, so I don't recommend doing it with more delicate hairs. So I will use this for goat hairs or foundation brushes or anything that really needs a deep cleaning, and I'll go through the process during the demo. If I am doing a quick cleaning or I have bristles that are a little bit more delicate, what I use is actually diluted liquid soap. Now, what I did was I purchased just a foaming hand soap dispenser. This one's from Target, but any of them work. And what I have in here is I have water and I put in about maybe this much soap. So we're looking anywhere between 10 and 20% when I fill up the container usually. I don't measure it, but it's mostly water. And then I add a little bit of Dr. Bronner's. Now I would recommend using unscented. I ran out of unscented, and so right now I'm using the citrus one. I have no issues with that. And if you look at different sources, some sources recommend using unscented cleansers. Others, like for example, Surratt, they say just pick your favorite fragrance because you want to use something that is pleasant when you're using the brushes and when you're cleaning them. So it's really personal preference. I haven't had any issues using the citrus one, but I do typically buy the unscented one. Now, if you don't have a foaming hand soap dispenser, and you don't have to, that's just my own thing. I haven't seen that specifically recommended anywhere, but a lot of people, what they do is they take a bowl, and I think this is a pretty good size bowl, and you're gonna fill it with water to about here, and you're just gonna add like a little quick squirt of the soap so it's diluted. You don't wanna use your soap straight up with something like this because it's way too concentrated. There are other bar soaps and so forth that you can use. It does not have to be a soap from a particular brush cleanser. Basically, you're looking for fewer ingredients. The fewer ingredients, the better. So Savon de Marseille, that is a pretty common bar soap that you can find pretty much, I think, all over the world. That is one that's very common for use with brushes. Again, that's going to be a solid soap, so I wouldn't use that with your more delicate fibers. For that, I would go with a liquid. Now, you don't have to use this is a Castile soap. You don't have to use a liquid soap like this. Another option is shampoo, and I also know people who have used gentle face washes as well. Now, shampoo was recommended by Surratt. That's one of their recommendations. They like to use baby shampoo. And again, if you talk to a Surratt makeup artist versus the Surratt recommendations on their website, they are not always the same. So it's really going to be a personal preference. But one of the things that some people do is also add conditioner. So I have washed my brushes with shampoo before. And again, you want to dilute it and make sure that you rinse everything very thoroughly. Now, when people use conditioner on their brushes, it's not something that you want to use every time. And I personally have not had the need to add conditioner for any of my brushes, but if they ever start feeling like they aren't as soft, I would definitely dilute the conditioner, rub a little bit in, and then thoroughly rinse it. So I would let it sit on the bristles for about 5 minutes or so, and then thoroughly rinse it out. And that's something that I wouldn't recommend doing more than, let's say, maybe once a year. And that's because when you use conditioner, we know how soft and smooth your hair gets, but that also affects how well the brush performs. So a smoother, softer hair fiber is not going to pick up product as well as something without the conditioner that is not quite as smooth. So we've all seen like those Pantene hair commercials and so forth where they're showing the hair fiber. You see like the little jagged pieces. All of those little jagged parts are picking up product. And when you smooth that out with conditioner, there's really not much there for the product to adhere to. So if you condition your brushes too often or you don't rinse it thoroughly, it's not going to perform as well as it would otherwise. Now, that's not to say to never use conditioner, because if your bristles seem like they're getting dried out and they're not getting enough moisture, specifically, maybe perhaps you haven't been using them frequently enough so they're not getting in contact with any oils, then yes, using a light conditioner would be a good idea. Again, you want to use something that's lightweight, not some sort of heavy duty, conditioner. And you want to dilute it because you don't want to overpower your bristles and make them ineffective. All right, now before we move on to the demo, I just want to mention Jaybird Walking is a YouTube channel that focuses on Fude beauty brushes, and she has a method for dry cleaning your brushes. And I watched that and I can't remember specifically what she did, but it's kind of similar to some of these things in my opinion. So you might want to check that out because it was a good idea and it's something she kind of came up with, I believe, on her own. So you might want to take a look at her channel. I'll leave that linked down below. Okay, so this is the bathroom where I clean my brushes. And you can see here that I have a drying rack with brushes. These are actually already dry. I just didn't take them out yet, so I wanted to show them to you. And then we have a sink here. This is another drying rack, and I have all of my stuff ready to go. Now, this is not something that you have to have. This is from Sigma. This is a brush cleaning mat. This is actually the small one. And there's a large one as well. You can see I have definitely been using it. And there's suction cups, and you can fit it into your sink. Now, my sink has the drain kind of in the middle. And because it's in the middle, these mats were really designed more to press up against a drain that's closer to the faucet. So because of that, I went with the small one, and you really want to make sure that you check the measurements on your sink before you buy them, because the big one is definitely much larger. It's too big for my sink. So I just fit it into my sink. Now, if you don't have a mat, you don't have to use one. I've only had this one for maybe a year or so. Before that, I would just use the bristles in the palm of my hand. So I would take my brush and I would just go like this. So let's start with the bowl method. So we've got a bowl and I put in a little bit of water. Here's my Dr. Bronner's. I'm just gonna add a tiny bit. And just swirl the soap around. And then you wanna take your brush, before you put it in here, before you put your brush in the bowl of water, you want to dampen the bristles under running water, because the running water will help release anything that's there, and it also pre-wets your brushes so there's not as much soap from the bowl that is going to cling to it. Now you want to swirl your brush in the bowl of water, and you can like kind of scrape it around, and ideally you do not have enough water to get all the way up to the ferrule. So you can swirl that around, and you can do that as much as you want, but then I would just take my brush and swirl it on my hand. Sorry for the camera work here. And just kind of want to keep doing this. And this one in particular, depending what you used on it, but you've got a lot of product kind of built in there. You want to make sure it displays out nicely. And then you're going to rinse this under running water. So you can take this, and sorry, I'm holding the camera with one hand. So normally I would use two hands, but notice that my tap is on right in the middle. You want lukewarm water, and you just want to thoroughly rinse this. Once you're done with the running water, you want to run your fingers over your bristles and just kind of squeeze out any of the water. Next, you can take a clean, dry cloth, and you can use microfiber, you can use a towel, whatever, and you're just doing the same thing, where you're squeezing it out. And then you want to let your brush dry. Now there are a few different ways you can dry it. As I mentioned, I have this drying rack. This one here is from Sigma, and you've got these silicone clips. You just kind of clip this in, so you can kind of clip it in just like this, or you can run this up through the bottom, and this here will act as a brush guard. So you can, sorry, it's hard to do this here, but you can just kind of pull this up. So your handle is still in the silicone, and then your bristles get kind of shaped by this here. So it acts kind of as a brush guard here. If you do not have a rack, which you do not need, I used one. I didn't have a rack until a year ago either. So what you can do is you want to take a towel and you want to fold it so that your handle is elevated, and any of the water that might have gone into the ferrule can kind of drip down. You just want to hang that over your sink, or you can use a cookie sheet, and the ledge, essentially the side of the cookie sheet, will help elevate your brush naturally, and you just want to cover your thing with a towel. Now, I personally don't like to use the bowl method. I feel like it's not as efficient, so I'm going to dump this out and show you what I do. So most of the time, what I do is I use my foaming dispenser, and I'm going to take this and I just squirt this all over my mat. So if it's not foaming well, just give it a little shake. Put that there. And my foaming soap is so diluted that honestly you go to wash your hands with it and it doesn't feel like it's coming clean. So it's a very dilute soap. So then I take this. Sometimes I will wet my brush first. Most of the time I don't, because again, mine's very diluted. And the mat is designed so that this left side here is specifically for eye brushes, and the right side has like bigger, bumps and so forth for like powder and face brushes. So we've got smaller, more delicate grooves here. So what I do is I just kind of start swirling it on my mat, and I go over the different sections here to make sure it's coming clean. And I usually do that with a few brushes, so I'll leave this just sitting on the sink, and then I'll do that with a few brushes until the soap seems like it's either gotten dirty or has kind of worn away. Let me show you with a foundation brush. So again, I'll just go here, and with the foundation brush, I usually do this 2 times. So you can see how the soap is getting some makeup pigment on it. So then I will turn on my tap, and I'm gonna rinse these out. So I just like to rinse it like this. So I make sure to kind of swirl it on my hand while I'm rinsing. Squeeze the water out. Do this one too. And with anything with a light color fiber, you can really see whether it's clean or not. Then with a foundation brush, I always repeat the process twice, just to make sure that it's really gotten clean. So now I just squeeze my water out and I set it to the side to dry. And again, with anything that I can fit that in my holder, it's kind of thick, so sometimes I do, and sometimes I just let it sit on a towel. Now sometimes I have a very dirty brush that I don't want to use the liquid for, and that can be a foundation brush. So I could have done the foundation brush as I just did, or I could use my Beauty Blender Solid. So what I do with this is I get my brush wet. So again, when I put it in running water, I'm only trying to get the bristles. So I get that wet and then I just kind of swirl it in the soap. So I get some of the soap on there, and the black one, you know, obviously it's gray. So then I just kind of swirl this, and sometimes I'll do this either on my mat or on my hand. Now this brush in particular is a stippling brush. So when you are washing a stippling brush, you're really getting these longer fibers more easily, but you do want to check to make sure that you're getting any of the shorter fibers as well. So I find those are useful to kind of go on your finger, because the bigger ones will kind of splay out and you can really get the smaller ones in the center. Squeeze it out, set it aside to dry. I hope that was helpful to see how I personally like to wash my brushes. And I don't usually use brush guards, but sometimes if I want to get it more in the shape that it arrived in, because brushes will bloom as you use them, but when you first get them, they're usually more tapered. And this is another style of brush guard, and this is mesh, so you slip it on over the handle and you leave it like this. And then you just let your brush dry like this, and it will have more of that tapered, you know, appearance. Before you use your brushes, you want to make sure that they are fully dry. So in my opinion, any sort of smaller brush, you want to wait at least 24 hours before using it. So even though it might feel dry to the touch, some of the center hairs in a brush might still be a little damp. And you really don't want any residual water to drip down into the ferrule. So if you have a larger brush, I always let them sit for 2 days. So personally, and if you're using a brush guard where everything's kind of pushed together and compacted, you need to allow extra time for drying, because you're not really getting as much air in between those bristles. So again, if you're using a brush guard, I would say 2 days. If you have a super large fluffy brush, you know, you're probably going to want to let 2 to 3 days depending on how big your brush is. But brush guard or larger brushes in general, I would go with 2 days. Everything else, I go with 1 day. Technically, you don't have to wait that long. 1 day is typically what is suggested for most brushes, but I like to think better safe than sorry. So again, brush guards, they are there as an option. You don't have to use them. Your brushes will bloom naturally as you use them, and I personally like them in the bloomed shape, so I don't typically use brush guards. So I hope this video was helpful. I know there was a lot of information. If there's anything I missed, please let me know if you have any questions or anything. And I apologize for the shaky camera work in the bathroom. It's a small bathroom, and as you could see, my countertop is very small. So there was nowhere for me to actually put the camera and nowhere for me to put it where you could actually see inside the sink. So that was the best I could do. But if you have any questions on anything, please let me know. If you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't already. I would love to know if there's anything different you do for cleaning or storing your brushes, or if you have any recommendations. And again, in general, I think simpler is better, and your #1 rule is make sure you thoroughly rinse, but don't get your water into your ferrule. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Have a great day and stay safe and healthy.